Now, can you go into your backstory on let people know how you were poisoned and what led up to that?
Definitely. So in 2005, I went to Chechnya, which I went into the Second Chechen War voluntarily to provide medical, psychiatric, and psychological care to Chechens who were being killed
Hmm.
by the Russian army. And I went with a man who ran an international disabled running club. I had volunteered a lot with his running club. I had led athletes in the New York City Marathon in wheelchairs. I had run with blind runners. I led a blind climber to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. So I had been very involved, and we also did start a chapter for the disabled Chechen children in Chechnya. But basically, I went there to help and to start this running club for the children who all don't have limbs and have penises blown off and horrible injuries. So I went there with this man, and the only way we got in, because Chechnya was a stranglehold of Russia. It's surrounded by Russian military tanks. When I was there, I've never seen so many Russian military tanks in one place. It was very frightening. Um, and the only way we got in was that this man, who was presented to me, I should say, as a sports writer's journalist, which he is, but that is his cover, for the fact that he's a KGB agent, was with us the whole time and shadowed us, made sure that he knew exactly what we were doing. He actually stole $3,000 from me, which I was going to give to the Chechens, and he stole clothes that the man that I was with, who was going to give them to the Chechens, he also stole all that clothes. So he particularly didn't like me because I was a do-gooder. I was there, and I did provide medical, psychiatric, psychological care to the children. So he particularly didn't like me for that reason. The man that I was with was more concerned really with starting the running club and getting his name, unfortunately, in the newspapers, which we were. We were in the Russian, the Chechen newspaper, and we also eventually were in the New York Post, because I worked really stridently and ferociously to get three of the boys out to get more extensive medical care in New York City. So we were able to pay for their plane fare and their medical care. I got doctors just to, out of the kindness of their heart, provide medical care to these boys. And we provided them with new prosthetics and medical care. And then they went home. So when I was there, I developed flu-like symptoms. And then 3 days later, I couldn't get out of bed. I had high fever. I had projectile vomiting of blood and diarrhea with blood. And when I tried to get out of bed, I fell. And, at the time I was an elite athlete, so I knew right away, as if I was my own emergency room patient, that I had been poisoned. And it probably had been put in my food or in my drink. And for 3 years, I lived in a liminal space between life and death, really closer to death than to life. I barely could manage to get myself to work. I am a really tough individual, and I persevere pretty much through anything. And I would walk a block to work, and I would have to rest for an hour at work before seeing patients. It took a phenomenal amount of energy just for me to lift my head up in the morning. And then I should say, during that 3 years, I had pneumonia. I had GI parasitic infections chronically for about 17 years. I developed 20 food allergies, never had any allergies in my life. I was always the picture of robust health. And those food allergies did change over the years, so I developed other food allergies. Basically, anything I ate, and I have a very healthy diet, I would develop an allergy to, because my body was in hypervigilant mode. It was trying to protect me, like as it had from this poison, but it's sort of like you can't turn it off. So I currently have an autoimmune disorder. So I get tired a lot, for instance. But I persevere. I'm tough, and it's been a long journey. It took me 5 years to have the energy to begin to investigate my symptoms and what I was poisoned with. And I did investigating on the internet. I found out that our military had vaccinated U.S. military who went to Russia because it was common knowledge that they poisoned people with anthrax, man-made anthrax. So many of the symptoms of the people that had been poisoned were similar to mine. Many of the men died from heart attacks. Luckily, I did not have that. But many of the women had symptoms such as I had, which were I had horrible rashes around my mouth, around my eyes. My eyes would blow up. Well, they still do blow up, but not as much as they used to. Like, they used to blow up in the morning. I couldn't even open them. I had autoimmune disorders like many of the women, and many of the women also developed pneumonia as well. And I had to really search for homeopathic ways to treat it. I was lucky enough to talk to one of the post office workers that had been exposed with inhalational anthrax. And I learned that thieves, which is an essential oil, kills anthrax. So I did, for instance, this is just one for instance, I did a high dose detox with thieves, actually many times. And it was a long journey. I was tested on the Rife machine. The Rife machine is also not legal in this country. It's legal in Germany, and it basically treats people through vibrational frequencies. So if you have a certain bacteria or virus, it has a certain vibrational frequency. And on biological testing of my hair, my fingernails, and morning sputum, she found that I had man-made anthrax all throughout my body. So that also was very much a directive for me then to investigate. And it really has been a long, long journey of trying to uncover people. For instance, I found a doctor at the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, who was trying to create a blood test for people that had been poisoned with anthrax. But she said that after 3 years, most people don't have antibodies anymore, so you can't detect anthrax in the blood. And when I had found her, which was in 2012, so I was poisoned in 2005. And when I had my blood tested with this woman at the NIH, it was 2012. And she said, it's too far out. But many Western doctors are challenged. They don't see people who are poisoned. They don't know about anthrax. Even specialists led me astray saying, oh, we'll test your blood. And there is no blood test for anthrax other than when you're actively sick with it, when you're septic, which is like a blood infection, if you think of it, which most people aren't going to think of it because it presents as blood poisoning, which is why the FSB use it. It's a perfect cover to kill people. If you think of anthrax poisoning, you have to draw the blood during the acute phase of it in order for it to grow out in a culture. And there have been some incidents of that at Harvard. There was a case of a woman who was drumming, and the spores came off of the drum, and she inhaled it. So I should say anthrax is a bacteria that's endemic in the soil in the Middle East. So also doctors there are more familiar with it. Also, poisoning is more familiar in the Middle East, so they know how to recognize it and treat it more. In this country, anthrax has a really high incidence of mortality. I think 68% for GI anthrax. And yeah, so it was a sheepskin that this woman was drumming on, and the spores, she inhaled them. So that's a long story to answer your question.
No, that's so interesting. It's what goes through your mind when you realize I'm sure, when we all start getting sick, it's like, I'm sick. I have this virus, this bacteria or something. But then when you realize that, oh, I'm not only sick, I'm actually poisoned with man-made anthrax by the KGB. What goes through your mind when something like that?
Oh, initially, well, I should say right off the bat with this man, when I got off the plane in Russia, he met us. And I had to use the ladies' room, and he told me that I couldn't use the ladies' room, that there wasn't time. So we got into this car, and this is all in the book, by the way. I was in the back with him, and I knew something was off with him. And I whispered in the ear to the man I was with, could you please say you have to use the bathroom? And sure enough, we were driven to a place where we could go to the bathroom. But right off the bat, when I looked in his eyes, I knew he was a cold-blooded killer. I'd never looked into the eyes of someone who didn't have a soul. I mean, he was a trained assassin. And so I figured it out really quickly, although I wasn't told. The man I was with knew he was a KGB agent, and they had actually done work together. I won't even get into that. I don't mean espionage or something, but they had worked a lot together with this man starting running clubs all throughout Russia. And they had a 25-year-long history together.
Oh, wow.
So, but when I was treated that way, I'm a physician. I was an elite athlete. Even though I was raised not to have a voice and be a good Catholic girl and not to be seen and not to be heard, I've learned in life that I need to assert myself if I want to get anywhere. And that was just a simple affront to him that how dare I have any needs. At one point, I was using the bathroom. So we were in a general's house in Ingushetia, which is a neighboring province next to Chechnya. And I was using the bathroom. He walked in on me in the bathroom and told me to get out. And I told him, I'm not getting out. Like, this is inappropriate behavior. Get out. So he, needless to say, didn't like me, but I was enraged. I was furious. I felt betrayed by the man who brought me there, who didn't tell me this. And when I confronted him, he very quickly didn't want to talk about it, because I said I was going to go to the New York Times with this, American citizen is poisoned in Chechnya, providing medical psychiatric care. It's pretty outrageous. It took a long time for me to process my anger, and but to be bitter and angry doesn't help me. And
No.
what I learned from it, which was to slow down and to embrace my vulnerabilities, to admit that I have that I'm frail, that I'm not this superwoman who can, charge into any war zone and just come out unscathed, that I actually am more than I thought I was in many ways, that I'm this loved person, that the universe always loved and recognized me, and I was always held by the universe. And so it was a gift. Paradoxically, being poisoned, it was a gift, not only for me but also my patients. It changed the way I worked with my patients. I felt I couldn't do my job just in the very Western way psychiatry is practiced, even though I was a psychoanalyst as well. And I have very loving, intense relationships with my patients, but I began to work with them much more spiritually. And they also began to, well, some of them, not all of them, to have the ability to make impasses through struggles that they couldn't get through and understand. So that's the paradox of all this, and that's what my book is about. Yeah,
I think that's so important, and I think it's so hard to get there. I know I've, and all my listeners, they know my struggles with PTSD. It was probably 4 or 5 years, and a lot. And where I really made progress was just kind of checking out of society and spending 3 years mostly in the woods of Michigan, figuring myself out, and why am I agitated? Why do I feel this way? it's probably that was started in late 2017 when I was diagnosed. I mean, obviously it was there before that. You mentioned that, you know, about going to a war zone and how like, oh, I shouldn't have this expectation. And I did the same. I spent 10 years or over 10 years in these war zones. And then when I was finally diagnosed, it kind of hit me like, how ludicrous was it for me to think that I would go to these war zones, have all these experiences, and just everything would be fine. Like there's nothing there. And it kind of like where you're saying that you now, you relate to your patients in a different way. You have this different view on how you look at the world in a lot of ways. The same thing, I can relate to that because I think we talked about it when we spoke the other day is, well, I wouldn't wish post-traumatic stress on anyone. It's the worst. And I've dealt as a paramedic, I've dealt with a lot of really terrible things. It's the worst thing that I've ever dealt with as far as you don't feel you have control, like you're just grasping at straws. And coming out of it, mostly in the last year, coming out the other end of it, I don't know that I could have gotten to this point of how I relate to the world and everything had I not gone through it. And it's this, I'm still struggling on that one in a way. It's in a way, and what I've told some people, I talk with people who call me up and ask, hey, can you help me with my PTSD? I'm having a bad time right now. And I kind of relate it when they're ready. While it's the most terrible thing I've ever been through, in a way, it's almost the most beautiful thing because I've changed so much of who I am and how I interact and relate to the world and people. And, I'm so empathetic.